Thank you, Alex. So before I just dive right in and start talking about identifying our gap analysis, let's first talk about being in control of our future and the destiny of our own websites. When we really think about being in control of our destiny, it's truly in the internet world through the company we keep. And we tend to forget that relationships on the web are very similar to relationships in real life. And the best way I can really put this to you is in terms of a neighborhood. So think about the backlink portfolio that your website's accumulated as your link neighborhood. And similar to your real life neighborhood, it's important to know who your neighbors are, who's living across from you, what community you're surrounding yourself in. And your neighborhood really depends on what your goal is. Just as in life, you might want to live in more of a secure suburban neighborhood if you're planning on having kids, raising a family, or maybe if you're a little bit younger, you thrive in more of a downtown setting, you're going to want to be somewhere a little bit more urban where things are always going on. You need to take those same things into consideration for your website and the links that are pointing to it. But when you think about that company, if you're sitting back and just letting links come to you, if you have the benefit of links just coming to you, which we'll get to in just a minute, you're not really controlling the company you keep, and you could end up in a situation where people are moving into your neighborhood that you might not feel comfortable living next to. So we really need to move away from the idea of passive link earning. You've probably heard discussions in the SEO world of the idea that if you're doing things right, you have a great website, you have a notable brand, you have web presence, then you should just have links coming to you naturally as you organically earn them. Well, I certainly believe your website should earn links based purely on its merit. But what I don't believe is that your website should passively earn these links without any manual effort or outreach. Again, that's like inviting people into your neighborhood without truly caring if it's a good fit for your goals or your community. So this idea of link earning, I think it can be a little misleading. While you do need to earn links based on the type of quality that your website has, you should also take control of that. What I mean by that is you should solicit linking to your site manually. You need to actually ask. So think about your real life relationships. If I want something in real life from a neighbor, a coworker, my boss, I'm not going to get it if I don't ask for it. The same thing generally happens with your website. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hey, my website's got a couple great links. I didn't ever ask for those. Heck yeah, that is excellent. That is a great indicator that you're doing all the right things. You probably do have a fantastic website and some great content, but you're missing out on additional link opportunities. Especially, we hear with bigger brands that these are the types of brands that tend to naturally gain their links. And they have a little bit more of an advantage in that people probably know what they're selling. Think about some of the top brands that you might be aware of. They immediately come to mind, some of those fast food brands, maybe some great tech brands. But even in those cases, even with our big brands, you are missing out on link opportunities by not going after them. Every time someone's talking about you, that's considered a fresh mention, right? And if you don't find those on the web and outreach them, asking them for a link back, you're simply leaving links on the table. We actually see that more often with these big brands that have a bit of a PR machine working in the background, because a lot of the PR minds haven't really meshed with the SEO minds completely yet to integrate together to really capture those links as they happen. So essentially that's one gap that is left behind if you're not doing some link building. But you know where this really affects you? It's when you're a smaller business, or maybe a mom and pop type shop. You don't have a huge audience that's already aware of you online. People maybe aren't familiar with your brand at all. So to simply sit back and go, okay, we need to just earn links on our merit, means that you're probably not going to earn very much at all. And it's not because you aren't doing things right, it's just because people don't know about you. You have to remember, on the internet, your links are your roads. And if you're not building roads to your website and you're just hoping people will build them themselves, I think you're a little misguided there. So, where does this leave us? It leaves us in a position where we really need to be thinking about our link building strategies and building those highways to our websites. Whether you're an in-house SEO or you work for an agency, or maybe you're just trailblazing on your own, there's things that all of us can be doing to help us make great plans and identify the players involved and capitalize on the potential successes. But there's also a lot of work we need to be doing to communicate and to set proper expectations so our audience knows what to anticipate, or our clients know what to anticipate when we start our campaign. So the natural starting point is the goal. We have clients come in actually fairly frequently to us here at Page One Power, and we'll ask them what their goal is, and we tend to hear a lot of different things. But one of the things we hear a lot is, oh, I want 8 to 10 links a month. Whoa, that is not a goal, right? 8 to 10 links is a means to an end, and so when you're assessing either your internal or your client's goals, remember to ask, yes, but what do you want these links to do for you? Some people might not know the answer to that question, and it's our job to help fill in that information by assessing their site and assessing essentially what they want to do in their space. You can typically figure out what their goal is going to be. There's a couple of major goals that tend to be the most common, anything from increased organic traffic, increased conversions, keyword rankings, or brand visibility. All great goals, many that work together, and all of those can be affected by link building in a positive way. The goal is the most important part. If you haven't accurately determined what the goal is, you're starting your campaign off on the wrong foot already, and that will cause problems down the road. So it's really important to communicate very clearly with your client or with your company to understand exactly what they want those links to do. Once you know your goal, though, you get to move on to the fun part. In my opinion, that's the plan. Essentially, how are you going to meet those goals? Here, we call them our strategic write-ups. We do them at the beginning of every single campaign, and they tend to be very different depending on what our clients' needs are. But there are some similarities between each one. We'll get a little bit into that more with our gap, but the number one thing, or the number one part of our plans that always exist, are the pillars. The pillars are going to be your strategies and your techniques that you're using to essentially meet the goals of the client or of your organization. Your plan is crucial. Obviously, if you're not creating a target and knowing where you're headed, then you're just on a bus driving aimlessly. That's never going to result in success, trust me. But the final element of controlling your own destiny isn't just creating a great plan. Often I've found that our link building campaigns tend to go off the rails when we haven't also identified all of the players. Not just who's on our team internally, but who else is going to be affecting this plan. For example, I've just recently been working on a campaign where there's a lot of different players. We work with the client themselves, who is actually a huge brand that has many levels of bureaucracy, essentially, and so we're dealing with marketing managers, we're dealing with our client liaisons, we're dealing with the client themselves, and there's been some hiccups along the way, essentially based on us not having a full awareness of who all these players are and who we need to be communicating with to reach individual goals. For example, if we need to change some title tags on the site, we're talking to someone very different than we would be when we're discussing content for the websites. So this player identification will be essential to actually determining a real timeline and essentially determining what your gaps will be, because often those gaps are formed around those specific players. So I've been talking about the gap a lot without telling you anything that you probably really want to know. So let's just get into the gap itself. This is truly where the best laid plans can absolutely go to hell or be really successful. So let me set up a scenario for you here. You've crafted your strategic SEO or link building campaign plan for your company or your client. On paper, it looks awesome. You just need Jan from social to share the calendar, Dave in web dev to fix some title tags, Cameron in content to get the team producing top of the funnel marketing content. All of that will result in essentially a killer link building campaign. So you're approaching it going, we got this in the bag, right? Well, let's slow down because this is where things tend to fall apart. Let's talk about the gap and the elements. The pillars, as I mentioned, are going to come from your link building assessment. A coworker of mine, his name's Nicholas Chimonis, put together a link building assessment on inbound.org. I strongly recommend you check it out. It's a comprehensive checklist that will walk you through what you need to be assessing on your website before you even consider link building. This can be anything from your on-site and technical elements to your overall content to your ability to really reach the brand, or excuse me, the audience that you're interested in. Again, I strongly recommend you check that out. It'll help you determine what pillars are going to be the most important, what groundwork you need to lay to have a successful link building campaign. Then, of course, you've got your players, as I mentioned in that brief little run through. You got Jan, you got Cameron, and you've got Dan, all needed to essentially get your plan off the floor. So these individuals, as I mentioned before, are often the biggest influence on your plan succeeding or being derailed. I was talking recently, just last month, on a Search Engine Journal webinar where we were talking about scalable link building in 2016, and afterwards we got a lot of really great audience questions. One person in particular, though, seemed really frustrated, not with us or our content, but because he heard everything we were saying about integrated marketing, and he's going, hey, I'm stuck in a situation where I really want to push our social department to work very closely with our content development department to be pushing out this essentially top of the funnel content to reach a greater audience and start moving people down our marketing funnel. Makes a lot of sense, right? But he's going, hey, what do I do if they refuse to work with me? They won't share the social calendar. They don't want to talk to me. And he said, you know, I'm not in a position where I can force change. I hear him, and I understand how frustrating that must be. And unfortunately, in his case, where he was coming to us hoping we'd have a solution, at the end of the day, we're going, hey, you might have to work with what you've got. And I understand that that wasn't what he wanted to hear, but I think a link building gap assessment can really help not only show him what he can actually do on his own, but also help identify the dangers of not having that integrated marketing element when you're really looking at a risk versus reward assessment. And then finally, it's really important to be realistic. Like I mentioned in this example, if you have a social department that's unwilling to collaborate with you, at the end of the day, you need to really evaluate your ability to effectively execute on your strategic plan involving them, or if you need to just move on without them so you're not facing pushback for the duration of your campaign. A link building gap assessment isn't going to solve your problems, but it will allow you to effectively communicate risk versus reward and allow you to prioritize based on what's most important for your client's goals. Let's look at an example of a template that I put together for you guys to look at today. This is a very basic GAP template here. They can absolutely be a lot more detailed, but I didn't want to bog you down with all those details now. So you can see here, obviously, the client goal is at the very top. It's in the center. You always want to have that on paper, on documents, because when you're working with your client, if that goal changes, they're going to be able to see very quickly, oh, we have not communicated our updated goal, or oh, we're not on the same page because this goal isn't what I thought we were going after. So make sure you're always keeping your goal front and center for your client. The next thing that I've mentioned a couple times here are your strategies. So in this GAP assessment, we had determined that there were some on-site issues that were really going to ultimately affect our ability to get some of the rankings they wanted to see, especially based on things like title tags. They had a problem with some multiple redirects, and in a lot of cases, their really great content on their resource pages was actually orphaned. So this was really going to impact our ability to link build for them. The second pillar was content creation. This was a campaign where we were working with multiple websites, and for each website, they had a bit of a different scenario in terms of their content needs. But across the board, we did want to get some fresh content going for them, and especially to aid our link building, we were really interested in creating some top-of-the-funnel pieces, while we also wanted to balance that with some mid and low funnel to help drive converters down that marketing funnel for them. And then the final part of our pillar was, of course, link acquisition. Link acquisition is a section where you really have a lot of wiggle room in terms of how specific you want to be. As you can see here, I was not specific or detailed at all, and that's because of this specific client and the understanding and the progress we've made in the campaign. Especially at the beginning of a campaign, you want to be more specific. You want to talk about the different types of links you're going to be building or that you plan on building, and the essential impact that those all can have so you can weight it correctly. So what are these need, plan, and actual columns that you're looking at here? This is essentially the hardest part of this entire assessment. You see in your need column, I've given them numbers on a 1 to 10 scale. This is where I determine how great their need is to have this done on their website. For example, let's look at the pillar 1 on-site. We have optimized title tags for all A programs. You can see in my notes I indicate that there was actually very few adjustments needed. It was mainly minor tweaks across very few of the websites. So in terms of the impact that was going to make, it was going to be fairly low. Although if there had been instances of many programs needing title tag changes, that score would be much, much higher, as obviously a title tag change could have much faster and larger impacts on the website. So you need to really assess, based on the items you're discussing in your pillars, the true potential they have on the website. This is so important because it allows you to prioritize. Once you have all of those ratings for an entire section, you're going to add them up to get an overall score. So you can see here, if you look through our needs column, we've scored each pillar at an 18, 22, and 24 consecutively. This indicates for us that link building is our most important priority. This is going to start immediately at the beginning of the campaign. However, we also identified that content creation is a very, very close second. And without this content creation, it could absolutely hinder our link building acquisition. So not only are we going to kick off link building as a priority, we're definitely also kicking off content creation as our second priority. However, on-site in this case isn't quite as important, and it can be done a little bit more throughout the duration of the campaign. So in terms of allocating resources, manpower, and working with other departments, they're going to be the lowest priority here based on this specific scenario. Now, let's move on to the plan column. When you get into plan, you start looking at what can we actually do, right? And this is where your strategic plan really comes into play. This is what you're telling the client you're going to be able to do. naturally you tend to base this on a best case scenario. So I'm thinking, let's go ahead and create some low in the funnel pieces. I'm rating that around a 4, primarily because that's not going to have a very large impact on our link building acquisition, but it is going to be beneficial for the website to really pull in those converters, which will ultimately help them make their goal of more money, right? But in terms of our priorities, we really want the top of the funnel and the middle funnel pieces. So you can see that our plan really, it doesn't deviate too much from what we've indicated we need. But this is where the gap truly comes in, and that's in what is actually done. Remember, this is the when the best laid plans go to hell part of everything. So, for example, let's look at the pillar 1 for on-site again. And you can see for optimized title tags, I rated it a 0 in actual. The reason for this, as you can see in my notes, is that no changes have been implemented. Now, remember, we did rate this a low priority, and we typically look at this in a quarter view. But if at the end of the quarter none of our changes have been implemented, and we originally told the client this was part of our plan, we need to explain exactly what happened. This is also a great indication of where your players come into the picture. We were not able to make those changes for them. We were able to make our recommendations and pass them on. But once we'd done that, they were in the web department's team, the web team's hands to make these changes. And in this particular scenario, working with a large brand and multiple layers of bureaucracy to get through, it's very, very difficult to get changes implemented on this site. And so it was really important for us to communicate what the actual effect or actual ability was going to be. You see that again in the next section with cleaning up multiple redirects. Again, I rated that a 2 when we had originally said, hey, this is a 7 priority. And that's because for the clients, although they heard our recommendations and understood that we were saying it was important, for them, it was a low priority, partially because it was such a large job. They didn't have the people to execute this plan, and they were able to make very few of the changes on their end. It's so important to be able to show the actual, not to direct blame or to try and pass a buck, but to give true transparency into a campaign. It also allows you to reassess for the next quarter as your link building acquisition continues. What's working? What's not? How do we best use the client's time and money to effectively achieve their goals? If you're seeing some zeros or even those 1s and 2s that we're seeing in some of these actual columns, that's a really big problem. Obviously, with link acquisition being an agency, we have a lot more control over that, which did allow us to execute very successfully. But with things like content creation and on-site, ultimately outside of our hands due to those players, it can result in a very big gap. And this is what we're communicating to the client here with this template that we're looking at. But now that you have the gap all listed out, what do you do with it, right? What comes next? Well, you got your best case, your middle ground, and your worst case scenarios. First off, integrated marketing. That's truly going to be your best case scenario. We recently had an offsite here with our sales team, and they kept bringing clients up to us where they wanted to talk about the potential challenges and pitfalls. It was a really exciting conversation because even with some of the worst websites in terms of no content to work with or maybe poor design, we consistently are telling our sales team, hey, it's okay if they aren't the greatest website. As long as they're willing to work with us, we'll get them there. That was the persistent message, as long as they are willing to work with us. Your integrated marketing. But I think I'm a little misleading when I call it best case, and here's why. When you're working in a truly integrated atmosphere, there's typically going to be, again, multiple layers of either departments or bureaucracy that you're also trying to get through. And in these cases, while you still might ultimately get great results, it's important to remember that it can be a really slow process and to take that into account. And that might even need to be part of your gap assessment, is the timeline. Especially when you're rating priorities, your priorities are directly influenced by that timeline and might need to be deprioritized or have a higher priority placed on them based on how quickly you'd like to see results and how quickly the client or the company you're working with will actually be able to implement them. And then finally, you know, in an integrated marketing scenario, it's easy to think the world is your oyster because you're realistically in the best position to succeed, and the range of link building tactics at your disposal is quite a bit more broad. So what kind of tactics am I talking about, right? For each of these scenarios, your best case, your middle of the ground, and your worst case scenarios of you're on your own, there's a couple tactics that you can utilize no matter what. Your first link building tactic that you really want to consider, regardless of the scenario you find yourself in, is going to be content created to be posted on third-party sites. Typically, this is also called guest posting, but let me throw in a caveat here. I'm talking about fantastic content, well-written, beautiful, educational, informational content. If you're not telling someone something new, if you're not presenting a message a different way, if you're just spitting out 500 words, that is not what I am talking about. The distinction is really clear when you're just acting as a regular web browser. If you're online looking at content and you find a piece that you want to share with your friends, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, the pieces that resonate with you. So this type of link building is going to be effective across the board. What you need to do in order to make this work to its fullest extent with integrated marketing is to truly partner with an internal PR team if they have them and a social team if they have them. You'll want to work with PR to have a consistent message, although on the content side that you're doing for link building, you also need to make sure that it is not an advertisement or a sales pitch. Again, keep it educational and informational. But you can work with the PR team to push this content out along with their own, and also with the social team. When we think about link building, it's important to remember that the links you're building are for the web in terms of just pure SEO, those signals that they're sending to Google. But they're also for the user. You want the actual human users to be interested in the things that you're linking to. And so a great indicator of whether or not you're effectively doing this is through a partnership with the social team. As they're sharing out the content that you're creating or dropping little tidbits along the way, teasers, if you will, to this content, if no one's engaging with it, it might be an indicator that you're either missing your market or you're missing the boat on your content and you might want to revisit your content strategy. However, these types of links, when done correctly, will be your evergreen links that will ultimately create a healthy backlink portfolio that will not result in any kind of weird penalty or links that slowly just disappear over time. These are the ones that will really last. The other type of link you're going to want to consider is going to be your kind of classic resource style page link. And the interesting thing is, over the last few years, I've seen outside of our own agency, these links almost seem to be going the way of the dinosaur. I don't see a lot of agencies talking about these. I don't see clients coming in the door asking about them, mainly because I think we've kind of forgotten about them. And that is a huge, huge missed opportunity. So let me dive into what I'm talking about a little bit more. With your traditional resource style link, I'm not talking about directories. I'm talking about an actual resource page. So if you say you have a client or you're a company that sells horse trailers or horse riding supplies. What you're going to be wanting to look for is a type of page that's listing other resources like that, whether it's a comprehensive guide to roping or how to train your horse to ride bareback or similar types of things like that, all very, very niche specific, related to a certain topic. And if you have a product, excuse me, not typically a product, if you have something on your website that also speaks to these types of things, so if you're selling supplies, say blankets for under your saddle, it'd be a great idea to have something on your website that talks about how to select the right blanket, right? That type of content is perfect for a resource page. It's, again, not going to be an advertisement. It's not trying to sell people something necessarily. It's providing them information that could potentially lead them to convert on your site. These pages tend to exist in virtually every niche. And these are going to be also, again, the types of links that really tend to stick around. The only thing you're going to really want to look out for with these resource style pages is a resource page that's trying to do it all. If you're looking at the page and you're going, okay, this looks like it's targeting multiple niches, or why on earth do they have chocolate candies on this horse supply website? That's an immediate red flag. If you're seeing discrepancies in the message or the brand that they're representing in terms of an overall industry like horses, then you're probably going to want to stay away from those websites. But again, your content links and your resource links are going to be the ones that, regardless of the scenario or the gaps you find yourself in, even if you're a one-man or woman show, you are going to be able to build these types of links. But again, moving back to our integrated marketing best case scenario, you are in a position to do a lot more bang with your buck. Typically, in an integrated marketing situation, you also tend to be working with a little bit of a larger brand. And that allows you to also go after one other type of link that you might not be able to if you aren't working with a company that has some brand equity. And that's going to be your mention links. Your mention links can either be brand mentions, so say you're McDonald's. It would be looking for mentions of McDonald's across the web where they are unlinked and simply requesting a link. But it doesn't just have to be your brand or your brand name. It can be other parts of your company. For example, do you have a CEO that's vocal and getting talked about in the media, hopefully in a positive way, and getting mentions of his own name in association with the company, his or her own name in association with the company across the web? Those are also missed opportunities for you. Same thing goes for maybe your managers. If you have lower level people in your company that also happen to have a web presence that's really powerful for your brand, those are things that can be capitalized on as well. And then finally, the other type of mention you might see is a product mention. Say you're involved in virtual reality products. They seem to be really huge right now. People are getting very excited about the developments in virtual reality. But it's also still kind of new. It's coming onto the market, and that's why people are so excited about it. So if you have a product that's related to virtual reality, that might also be a great example to get product mentions linked to on the web, where people are organically talking about your product, sharing their excitement about it. Hey, would you mind also linking back to us so people can find where to get it or to learn more about it? Those are going to be some of your most powerful links as well. And this, again, truly only works in that best case scenario if you have brand or product recognition. But if you don't, that's okay. You still got stuff available to you. Say you're in more of a middle scenario where you got someone that's willing to work with you a little bit, but you're also seeing some holes in terms of your gap. This might be even a little bit more similar to that template I shared a few slides back, where we're going, okay, they are willing to help us create content and they are willing to make some changes on site, but we're seeing it convert a little slower than we had planned, and you know, there's some hiccups. There's those gaps that we identified. That's okay. And to be completely honest with you, this meet in the middle approach is actually my preference. And here's why. When you have a company that just wants to fully integrate with you and wants to see it happen in a quick way, it tends to get messy, and additional gaps tend to pop up on the way. But in a meet in the middle scenario, it's more of a toe dip into the water. And what I mean by that is you get the opportunity to start small. I typically recommend someone that is interested in starting an integrated marketing process to start with just one element. For example, you know that the website needs some top-of-the-funnel content. That's a great opportunity to start with maybe 5 pitches. Make sure that they align with what the client or your company wants, and develop that content. Once you have your first 5 developed, you can push them out, get them on the website, and take a step back and go, okay, where are we at now? You might have issues that you need to fix. For example, maybe they didn't understand that the content needed to be formatted on the page. A beautiful page will attract more traffic than a page that was just thrown up, regardless of the content. Or maybe, you know, you need to tweak your SEO elements on page. If you're doing that with just 5 pieces of content, it's a lot easier and less overwhelming than if you're trying to manage multiple pieces of content in various stages of the marketing funnel across many different projects. So this small start is where you're typically going to see success. And then the additional element is you get an opportunity to slowly figure out how to work with your partner. There's going to be quirks with every client, every company, and every campaign. And it's important to know that if you're trying to treat every campaign exactly the same, it's not going to work out. Understanding those quirks, especially through a start small type process, is going to ultimately maybe take more time, but the payoff is going to be worth it. So in a partial collaboration setting, your meet in the middle setting, the other thing you're going to want to do is assess your strengths and weaknesses. As you could see in my gap template, we did that, and we found that our weaknesses were with the players involved. We knew that while we had some title tags suggestions and some content suggestions, and the client was absolutely open to those, based on the people that actually needed to make those changes, it resulted in a little bit of a weakness being unearthed for us, whereas we knew our strength was going to be link building throughout the campaign. Having that balance is ultimately going to allow you to capitalize on what is going to result in the most payoff in this meet in the middle scenario. Our final scenario, and maybe one that many of you find yourself in, is the you're on your own. And that's okay. Maybe you're a single man or woman team, well, I shouldn't say team, single individual working in a company where you are the SEO department. Or maybe you're a link builder and you're doing a little bit of almost freelance link building, and you find yourself just completely on your own. So what do you do in those cases? You don't have anyone to collaborate with. There aren't any other players. It's just you and maybe your client. Well, that's okay too. There's still a lot you can do there. First things first, your timeline is going to be so crucial, especially if there's just one of you. There's no way you can ultimately influence absolutely everything. You need to slow down and prioritize. So your gap's going to be really helpful in determining where your starting points are. For example, when I'm looking at the link building gap assessment we put together, if it were just me and I didn't have a team behind me, I would be in a situation where I would have to determine, is link building more important or is content more important, and what can I do now, but also what maybe needs to be prioritized a little bit later on. And in this scenario, typically I'm going to do a little bit of both, but I'm going to set proper expectations. For example, if I'm manually building links, you're not going to see your 8 to 10 in a month. You're going to probably see quite a bit of a lower number while I'm focused on also creating content. And the reason I want to also create that content is I'm going to build you better links once that content's created. But I don't want to just focus on content first without any link building at all, because that's just kicking the link building can down the road. That's not going to be the most beneficial solution for you. But if you don't communicate that clearly, your client might be left in a position where they're going, wait a minute, I thought that you were going to just create all this content, we were going to get all these links. I didn't realize that our link building was going to be impacted by this content creation. And you might be sitting back and going, hey, I thought that was obvious. Never assume anything is obvious when you're working with a client or even when you're working internally. Proper expectation setting is always going to really save you in the end when it comes down to discussing what your actual results are. Finally, you're really going to want to focus on building a healthy and a sustainable portfolio regardless of the scenario you find yourself in. At the end of the day, you never want your link building gap analysis to say, hey, we did not build the links that you wanted. That's going to be the most detrimental situation you can find yourself in. Remember, your client goal is at the very top of that for a reason. Everything you do needs to feed back into that client goal. And if you can't explain what your approach is in terms of that goal, your approach needs to be corrected, not the client goal. With all that being said, I know that was a lot of information, but I strongly recommend if you're in the middle of your own campaign or if you're maybe starting some new campaigns, start plugging it into a gap assessment and see if your priorities are in line with how you assess them, and start thinking about your efforts in terms of what's going to have the most bang for the client buck and how are you going to, again, impact those client goals. Whew. Now, we're going to take just a very, very brief break and present you with a poll. I believe that's going to come from Alex here, a little bit about our Page One Power services. And while you're checking out that poll, we're going to go ahead and open up a little bit to some questions. So if you have some specific questions, maybe related to a campaign you're running or some questions over gap assessment, if you want to learn a little bit more about some link building, throw them at me and let's see what we can dive into in the time we have remaining.
That's great. Thank you, Amy. And thank you, Alex, for the intro at the beginning. I'm Joyce. I'm from Calc. Thank you very much for all those that tuned in as well. Just a quick reminder to our viewers, we have recorded this webinar and we'll be posting it on the Calc website soon so you can rewatch it, as well as the links to the template and the checklist that Amy mentioned earlier. Amy, I really enjoyed the link neighborhood analogy that you did at the beginning, and I'll definitely be reflecting on this in my own links and what link neighborhood I'm in. I also look forward to using the gap analysis template that you showed us earlier. Like Amy mentioned, we're opening the floor to some questions. I've already got some quickly, if we can start. Amy, so at the beginning you mentioned a checklist. I know that was most of the questions that we received. Would you mind telling us the link of that and the author of that, and I'll make sure to include that in our blog post afterwards.
Absolutely. So this checklist is called, the actual title of it is Pre-Link Building Assessment, and it's on inbound.org, and it was created by Nicholas Chimonis. He's our essentially our tech SEO in-depth guru here. That man is a one-man team, not even kidding. And the beauty of this checklist is it literally walks you through all of the elements of a great website. Your technical, on-site elements, your content, your branding, everything. So it's really comprehensive and fantastic.
That's great. I've got one here from Mary. So Facebook ads to promote your content in order to make it more visible. Will it also help you build links if we use Facebook ads? What's your take on this?
That's a great question, and the answer, I guess, is it depends. And what I mean by that is there are ways to use Facebook to link build, but it's not necessarily going to be through your ads. That's really very separate from what we're trying to do with our link building. And it's also really important to remember that as of now, Google really still stands fairly staunch in their response that social does not impact your rankings. Now, yes, it absolutely can drive traffic and people and interest to your website, but there's also, I forget who did this study, but there was a great study that showed the type of people that really tend to engage on content, especially viral type content, or even with more social type content, Facebook and Twitter shared content. It actually doesn't result in the type of traffic that's going to convert on your website. I was just reminded this was a BuzzSumo study that was done in collaboration with Moz, if you want to check that out as well.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
One way to use Facebook to link build, though, is, for example, if you are already seeing some of your website's content shared on platforms like Facebook or Twitter, you can use that Facebook search bar to look for your title of your content and find out who's sharing it and talking about it. And that might result in an opportunity to either work with those people, maybe write some content for their blog if they have one, or to build a relationship with those people and look at potential link opportunities down the road.
That's great. I've got one more. You mentioned about encouraging employees to build their personal brands. I think it would be really great to hear your ideas on how brands can encourage employees to invest in this.
I love talking about personal brands. I work with a very large team here at Page One Power. It fluctuates typically between 16 and 25 people. And for each one of them, I think it's really important for them to focus on their personal brand. So we've talked about it a little bit in terms of what that means for them and for our company, and do those things have to go together. And I think one of the most important things with personal brand building to keep in mind that while you are tied and associated with your company, your brand can and should be separate from the company you work for. As an individual, you can pass equity back to your company, but you shouldn't feel like a mouthpiece for them, or that your brand has to directly relate back to everything, like, for example, Page One Power related in my case. The best ways I would say to build your personal brand is to truly engage in the atmosphere in which you live. So, for example, that with us and SEO, things like creating a post for Moz or Inbound, or working on webinars, or engaging in Twitter chats, and then again, things like following the people that are influencers in your community, and not just passively sitting back and watching them and retweeting them, but truly engaging with them. If you have an opportunity, going to things like trade shows is also a fantastic way to network and build your own brand. But it really comes down to taking an active role. Again, if you're being passive in brand building, just like link building, you're not going to be able to capitalize on the best results.
That's great. Those are all my questions. I think, Alex, are those all the questions that you've received from the audience as well?
Just hold on, give me 1 second. Well, actually, we have one more Okay, we have one more. Where can we get the comprehensive analysis that you were talking about earlier? That's a question from Leo. I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Leo, for your question. And so also, Amy, you were saying your TF guy made a comprehensive one. So
Yeah, and again, that's on inbound.org. It's the pre-link building assessment.
okay,
That's great.
we're going to include it in the blog post. Yeah, Joyce?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amy, and I hope to see everybody else at our upcoming webinars coming soon. Thanks again, Amy. That was great.
Thank you so much.
Okay.